Scaling in your business means that you have to promote and promote some more. Reaching a wide audience doesn't have to be a painful process, and we're here to help you. Sign up for your sponsor ad today. You provide the product, service, or event that you would like to promote, and we do the rest. Enter and win a sponsor slot today. It's a win-win. It's cost-effective and meets your need. For more information, email helloaudacitypodcast@gmail.com or simply send us a DM. You're listening to Hello Audacity Podcast, where we highlight audacity in business from startup to multi-level success, finance, health, wealth building, and the journey to self-discovery. The added bonus is that you get to learn from industry leaders and hear victory stories across the nation. Now that's Audacity. I'm your host, LaShaMarie. Let's get into it. In this next episode, this guest doesn't pull up a chair. She is taking a stand nationwide. She's here to tug at our hearts, inform, and empower us to make changes boldly. She's a mother, advocate, and aims to be a voice for the voiceless. Now, before we begin, please know that domestic violence is never okay. Please call the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 1-800-799-7233 or text 887-881. Hey, it's your girl, lashamariespeaks. Thanks for tuning in another episode of Hello Audacity Podcast. If you are new joining us, please click like, share, follow, subscribe, honey, so that you are aware of when we're bringing a wonderful guest, such as our next guest today. This is a little bit different. I always want to arm my audience, my listeners, so that we're well informed and keep advocating for the voiceless. And this guest is definitely doing that. We often watch heartbreaking, tragic, or unbelievable stories and movies that leave us in awe, questioning the world and the evil mindsets that are existing around us. But for many people, it's not just a movie or a story. It is their real life nightmare. And that's the case in my next guest. The story is definitely heartbreaking, but her voice will not be silenced. She is fighting out and being an activist. So the things that happen to her doesn't happen to anyone else. Let's go ahead and welcome our next guest. The platform. Hey, Hera, how are you?
Hi, I'm doing well. Thanks for having me.
Good. I'm so excited that you're on the show, because I love to raise awareness for individuals. I think that it is so important that we talk about things that are actually that could happen, that some of our loved ones have dealt with similar situations. So let's go ahead and introduce yourself to the audience and give them a little bit of context or your story.
Sure. So my name is Hera McLeod. Thank you for the lovely introduction. I am an author and speaker and a child safety advocate. I have been an advocate for child safety and also survivors of domestic violence for about a decade. I recently wrote the book called Defying Silence, a memoir of a mother's loss and courage in the face of injustice. You can find it just about anywhere you consume books or audio. And my whole journey in this issue really was born out of a situation where I escaped my abuser. And unfortunately, even though I fought very hard in family court for about 15 months, he was awarded unsupervised access to my 15-month-old son and proceeded to murder him. And what you'll learn from the book is really like how the court system completely failed my son. And the real shocker here is that this man was essentially a serial killer. And we brought all this evidence into family court and they still gave him unsupervised access. So one of the things that I advocate for, really my main goal, is for the family courts in the United States to keep kids safe and really take a hard look at what the current policies are when it comes to child safety. And instead of just assuming that parents should have equal parenting access, I think it is very important for us to address that not all parents are safe. And so we need to make sure that we have legislation that keeps it in mind and really closes the loopholes that currently exist that allow judges to really just make bad decisions. And I know people don't want to hear that, because they're like, oh, well, judges are amazing. And I think many of them are. But unfortunately, the way that our system is set up right now, it really is not with the protection of children in mind.
Yeah. Before I go any further, I want to, and of course, when I'm asking questions, if you're not comfortable, with answering them, please let me know. But I definitely want to know a little bit more about your son. I want to cast some light on him, because I just know that he was your absolute heart. So just to give us a little view of his little personality.
So my son's name was Prince. He was just a complete ball of joy. Unfortunately, I only had 15 months with him, so I didn't fully get to see his personality form. But I will say he loved his people. He loved being around our large family, and he would just brighten up a room. He loved his dogs. We had 2 little dogs at the time, and one of his favorite things was to run out into the backyard and scream at them to have them come back to him and inside. And luckily for him, and maybe unluckily for the dogs, is that they would let him pull them around. And so, the week he died, he had just started to say his first word after mama, which was ball. And he was just like the type of kid who was very empathic. He would come over and give you a hug when you weren't feeling well, and he would just know that something was wrong. He loved to dance, especially to Prince's Kiss. That was his I named him Prince because when he came out, he was singing. He was like, wah!
Now, you have 2 kids. You have a daughter.
So I have 2 daughters that I had after Prince.
Okay.
I decided, so when Prince passed away, it was kind of a moment where I was like, you can't unbecome a mom. Like, once you're a mom, you just are, right? And I explain to parents all the time, it's like your brain changes. It's like you're constantly thinking about where your kids are, and and I couldn't stop being a mom, but I sort of felt like I was this, like, I felt like I was not part of society anymore, as weird as that sounds. Like, I felt like I was sort of watching from the outside as this person. And not to say that, like, being a mom was the only part of my identity, but I have always wanted to be a mom so bad. And I also made the conscious choice to say that my ex was not going to steal my joy. Right. And, of course he stole a part of my heart, and I can't ever get that back. And I sincerely wish that I had the chance to see my son grow and become the man that I'm sure he would have become, which was an amazing man. But I really do think that when people say the best revenge is to live your best life, like, for me, I knew that meant being a mom again. But I also knew that because of the trauma that I had endured in a bad relationship, and also as the, essentially the victim and survivor of family courts, I was like, I never want to go back. I want to make it so that there is no way that a judge can tell me to send my child to someone that I know is dangerous. So I went to a sperm bank, and I got myself a sperm donor, and I became a single mom by choice. And it is one of the best decisions I ever made.
Awesome. Wonderful. Now, what year did Prince pass?
He died in fall of 2012.
2012. Okay, gotcha. Gotcha. Now let's talk about the relationship, because you were married to his father. Is that correct?
We were not married. Thank God. Because frankly, the way our courts are, I'd probably still be paying child support, even to the prison. So I thank the Lord that I was never married to him.
So can you give us some light about the relationship in the beginning, and how give us a view of how maybe the violence manifested?
Yeah, I mean, I typically tell people, abusers don't walk up to you and punch you in the face and ask you if you want to date them, right? It's just not how it happens. So in the beginning, he was very charming. We met on the internet, which, is obviously more mainstream now than it was back in 2010.
Right.
But it was still, where a lot of people met even back then.
Yeah, I met my husband of 18 years on MySpace.
Exactly.
So
A lot of people aren't willing to admit it, or weren't that back then,
Right.
that's where they met, but that's where people were meeting, right? So I had just gotten back from, serving a tour overseas with the US government, and I was, pushing 30, and I was like, I want to be a mom, I want to settle down. And I was dating with a purpose. I was like, okay, I'm going to find my future husband.
Right.
Well, and that's what a lot of people do, right? I think one of the biggest blind spots that I had was that at the time, I was feeling a lot of societal pressure. And, I literally had people that were like, wow, you're single? What's wrong with you? Which is your response should be like, hold up, I'm still in my 20s, or whatever. I'm in my 40s, and yeah, I'm single. It's none of your business. But I was feeling the pressure, and I was probably putting a little bit too many timelines on myself.
Mm-hmm.
So when I met my son's father, he said all the right things, that he was looking for a serious relationship too. He was already a dad to a little boy that I ended up also falling in love with because he was great. And I would say the first 6 to 8 months were not terrible. We had a lot to talk about. He was a very good storyteller, which, I mean, for good or bad, he ended up using evil, right? And me and his son, he had full custody of his son, and there was no other parental figure in the picture. Now, I did not know at the time that he killed the little boy's mother, right? So of course, that wasn't even something I considered. I was like, well, she died in a tragic accident or something, right? Which is essentially what he told me. And so I had become kind of a surrogate mom to this little boy. And so I got pregnant, which, was not intentional, but it happened.
Yeah.
And after that, that's really when the monster started coming out. I think he thought, I have her. I have her now. And at first it was a lot of emotional abuse, a lot of gaslighting, and it felt like we lived in a house of horrors. I mean, me and his older son were constantly just the gaslighting, and he would do something horribly violent and then just make it seem like it was my fault or his son's fault. And I think, like a frog in a boiling pot of water, it's like when you slowly boil the water, you're trapped, and I come from a very Christian family where you get married and you have babies and you stay with the father of your child. And so there was this, we were engaged, and I still had society in the back of my head going well, you should do what's right. You should do the proper thing. And
I'm glad that we're changing that narrative today and saying just because you're pregnant doesn't mean that you have to marry that person.
Exactly.
And also,
you don't want to be stuck.
Right. And also stop putting pressure on women to abide by your standards in time clock. I could be pushing 40 with no kids and not one engagement, but be perfectly happy in life. I think other people have this concept of pushing their narrative off on other people, which is wrong. And that's how people end up in rushed situations, and situations that actually bring them regret, because that's something that you actually have to sign up for and say, you know what, I'm ready for this. But if you're not sure, but you're thinking about what grandma won't and grandma said, and I'm pregnant, so and of course I'm a 70s baby. That was something that they did. My mother was pregnant with me and getting married, at a very, very young age, because it was just the right thing to do. So I'm glad that we're changing this, and not victimizing, I would say.
Well, I think what it is, honestly, I think a lot of people feel the societal pressure, feel like they have to somehow legitimize their family. And I think that when they give that advice to others or they project onto them, it's more of like a way to make themselves feel better for the decisions they made that they're now living with. Because there's a lot of really unhappy people in relationships who maybe rushed, and now they're in a situation where they're like, wow, I chose the wrong person, and that co-parent that you're co-parenting with is like, wow, I wish I was not connected to that person. And so when they see others going through it, instead of being like, hey, this is a cautionary tale, don't do what I did, right? They're like, oh no, that's what you should do, because it somehow makes them feel like the decision they made was the right decision.
Right. Now, how long were you in a relationship with him?
So it was only, I would say, like a year and a half. It was not very long. My son was 2 weeks old when we left.
Okay.
Things got really bad, but I will admit my head was in the sand. I did not want to see the writing on the wall. I mean, he was financially abusive, emotionally abusive, physically abusive. And I think I just still had this, I need, my son needs his dad. I need to make this work. And I kept holding on to this, I kept holding on to the belief or the hope that he was the person that I first met. I was like, I need to bring that person back.
Yeah.
And I was not fully willing to admit that person never existed. That was who he wanted me to think he was.
Yeah, that was the imposter.
Yeah. And it wasn't until he assaulted my 19-year-old sister that my parents came to get me and were like, no, we're taking you out.
Wow.
Yeah. That was the night that he held me at gunpoint and was like, I will kill you like I killed Sean. And I was like, who's Sean? And we got out of that house, thankful for my parents. My dad came and was like, son, we're not talking about this right now. Like, we can settle this later, but she and Prince are coming with me.
Okay.
And after hiring a PI, I learned that Sean was his older son's mother, and she was shot in the head about a day before their custody hearing.
Oh my goodness. Okay. I know I had a note down here because I knew that you left. I was thinking, how did you get the courage? What was the writing on the wall to say, this is my exit. I can't take it anymore.
I wish
you actually had
not on my own. I really literally, my family pulled me out. I mean, I am thankful. I think in many ways I owe my sister my life because, it was scary for her to come forward and say what happened. And I owe my parents my life for being like, we're not leaving them there. We're not leaving them there one more night.
Yeah. Now, did they know, or you didn't share some of the things that were going on?
I didn't share a lot of things that were going on, but I will say for those of you out there who might fear that you have a loved one that is in an abusive relationship, one of the biggest red flags is when that person tries to separate you from your family and your friends.
Ooh, yes.
Right. And when you see that happening, take that as a flag. And typically they do because they don't want them to know what's happening. Mm-hmm. And he was he started watching my text messages, reading my emails. He would lurk over my shoulder when I had phone calls. So I stopped calling and texting people when I was at the house because I was afraid that if I said something, or if someone asked me how I was doing, he would be there and then it would start this whole thing. Yeah. And so, I think that's one of
the isolation tactic as well. I shared very openly of a relationship that I was in. It was emotional and verbal abuse. And even that was crazy. It has you questioning, are you sane? Are you okay? When it got to the point where I was questioning every word that left my mouth before I stated it, I said, something's wrong. If you don't know what each day looks like. You wake up and say, are we going to be okay today? Is this going to be a bad day? Or either when you have concerns, to bring those concerns up.
Yeah.
Oh my God, please don't. Because then it's just going to come back on you.
Well, and I think that sometimes the emotional abuse can actually be worse because you can't see it, right?
Oh,
I mean,
yes.
It's like if someone punches you in the face, your family and friends are going to be like, why do you have that big bruise on your face? But you can't see the wounds that are caused by emotional abuse because they're not overt.
Yeah. Over time, I felt as if my existence didn't belong to me anymore.
Mm-hmm.
That he was everything. And you do fight to get back to that state where it was so yummy and good.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I know he's in there somewhere. And then you start making little changes on your own, saying, well, maybe if I do this, or maybe if I don't bring up that, or maybe, I could be this kind of person. No, nothing that you do or be is going to be enough for that individual.
Yep.
So it was a lot. I did get away, but I did go through a lot, and not just that. I was on a 5150 hold after attempting suicide. So it's alarming. I will say I did see the writing on the wall and say, I can't do this anymore.
Yeah.
This isn't going to get better. It's going to get worse. And I always thought that physical was next, and then I thought about my child and not having them in that kind of environment. But you do
I knew I had to go, right? It wasn't a matter of me not knowing. I think I just didn't feel safe. Like I didn't know how to safely extricate myself. Because he hadn't yet held me at gunpoint. Like that doesn't mean that he didn't try to kill me. Like there were definite moments where he made it very clear that I wasn't going to get away from him. So just walking away, like I was like, that's not going to happen. And it wasn't until my parents came to get me, because I think even before then, I would only tell them certain things because I still, because I was still trying to hold on to that, bringing that person back. I knew that if I told them everything, it would be done and there was no coming back. Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
And so, obviously I have now since told them everything, right? I wrote a whole book about it. Right. But at the time, I was also kind of I felt like I was protecting my son as well, because this was before I knew he was a serial killer. Right. And I was like, I don't want my family to look at my son's father in a way that is going to make them look at my son negatively. So I was very careful about what I shared in that vein, because I thought about my kid. I was thinking about my kid.
Right. Now, okay. So now you're with your family. You have safety. Now he wants to see his son.
Well, no. For 3 months, we didn't hear a word. His attorney reached out to me and told me that I should return the car that I owned that he had been using. And I was like, so you want me to give him my car? No, not happening. But he never asked about Prince for 3 whole months. Didn't hear a word. So I hired a private investigator. I filed custody in the state of Maryland, where I was living at the time. And we didn't hear anything. It wasn't until my birthday that year, so this was October, we left in July, that he finally answered my custody case and was asking for full custody or something, which was bizarre. I was like, you haven't seen him in 3 months, and like all of a sudden you're asking for full custody. But yeah, in that time between when we left and when he finally answered, he took out over $500,000 in life insurance policies on my son. That's no, but yes, he did.
Yeah, I saw that question was coming. But before we get into that, now you're battling him for custody rights, and you have to go through the whole family law situation. Of course, you're bringing evidence to them about, have you ever went to the police? Was there any filings? Was he ever arrested?
Yeah. So
Use.
I never reported any of the abuse towards me, which is common, right?
Right.
And I didn't expect the courts to really give my word that much weight, because I understand that, right? Like, people make accusations all the time. I knew I didn't have like clear evidence, but what I decided to do when I hired the private investigators, I was like, who is this person, right? Because obviously this is not the person I thought he was.
Right.
And I was very shocked at what I learned. Not only were there 2 people in his life who were killed or died under mysterious circumstances, he had assaulted several people, but interestingly, like, none of it ever stuck. And he did crazy things. Like, 6 months before the mother of his child was murdered, he changed his name to his son's name and then tried to claim that her life insurance policy was for him. I mean, it was just crazy. Like, his own mother ended up with a plastic bag over her head in the house. The rest of his family was like, yeah, he killed her. Like, all this stuff. And I'm like, how is it that somebody gets away with all of this stuff and is still free? Like,
yeah. So when you guys were dating, you didn't have a lot of contact with his family.
So I did not meet his real family. He introduced me to people who were essentially actors who lied to me and said that they were his family. I did not find out until after we left, that his real family was estranged from him because they all believed that he killed his own mother.
Wow.
And that's the thing. I mean, people say like, oh, meet the family. I met the family, kind of. I mean, you just never know. Like, you never assume that people are going to just lie to you.
Right. Wow. Jeez.
It was a whole thing. Like, just, he was very good at the game. It is shocking how good he was.
So you go through this PI, you have this evidence, of course, and does family court do they take this evidence? Of course not.
So I think one of the biggest issues, I mean, there's so many in family court, but one of the biggest issues is that oftentimes people make the assumption, even people within the legal system, that civil court, which is family court, has the same burden of proof as criminal court, right? So you and I both know that someone, let's take O.J. Simpson, for example. He was not convicted in criminal court, but he lost in civil court. And the reason is that the burden of proof is different, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's the same in family court as it should be. Like, if you believe somebody is abusive to a child and has abused before and is likely to abuse again, you don't need to believe it without a shadow of a doubt, right?
Mm-hmm.
You need to believe that it's likely. And unfortunately, even with all of the evidence that we presented, the judge was like, but he hasn't been convicted yet. And I had his older son's grandmother come testify to like how she had witnessed him abusing his older son. I had a police officer come testify to say that he was the sole suspect in this murder, and all these things. And it just wasn't enough. I mean, because I think that the courts they want to get families out of the court system, which I totally appreciate. And I think at the time, and even now to a degree, there isn't a lot of infrastructure or appetite to realize that some parents don't have any business having unsupervised contact with children.
Right. Now, I know that there came a day where they said that he doesn't just get visitation, but he gets unsupervised visitation, which I could imagine scared you.
It was horrible. Like I said recently, I just testified last week for a bill in Maryland to require custody evaluators to have training specific for child abuse cases. And one of the things I told the legislators is I said, imagine having to send your child across a minefield. There are mines, right? And you have to send them across with no protection. and just hope they don't die. And then the court is telling you, oh, don't worry, there aren't that many mines. Oh, don't worry, they probably won't step on one. And you're like freaking out because you're like, all it takes is one, and then they're gone, right? And I think a lot of people hear that and they're like, well, they can turn it off because they're like, well, it's not my kid. I'm not going to be in family court. But then I would pose the question to you, what happens when that child who has been terrorized for 16 years by this abusive parent knocks on your door and wants to take your daughter to prom? That's your problem, right? Because even if you think that you have the most amazing family, I mean, I came from a very close-knit Christian family with two parents who had been married for years and years and years, and I still ran into a psychopath. And, you know, as much as I know that his dad was responsible for what he did, I can only imagine what type of environment creates that person. Because I really don't think people are born that way. I think they're created.
Yeah, I do too. I watch a lot of things. It's just hearing the stories. There's always a story behind that individual.
Yeah.
How they were raised or abused or felt abandoned. There's always something that's there that builds the character.
Yes. But it starts in family court. I guess what I'm saying is like it's a vicious cycle. And I think that oftentimes, because so many of us are silenced, and this is one of the reasons I named my book Defying Silence, because I'm like, when you're in it and you are fighting for your child to be safe, you can't speak. You are completely silenced, because if you try to speak out against the system, these judges will use it against you. And so we have so many people who are impacted, both men and women. This is not just a women's issue.
Right.
I mean, active fathers who are like sending their kids into horrible situations, not sure if they're going to ever return. And so, and they're silenced too, because it's like you're afraid to say anything because you're afraid that you're going to lose custody of your children if you have the nerve to speak out against the system. And so for me, when I lost my son, I felt like I had two choices. I either get in the coffin with him, or I keep living and I make sure that I do whatever it takes to make sure that this stops happening. And at this point, like I'm the family court's biggest nightmare because I have nothing to lose. My kid's not in it anymore, right?
Right.
So I'm going to scream to the mountaintops and I'm going to tell people what's actually happening here.
Right. Now, on these visits, what did he have? A couple of visits with him?
He had 4 visits.
Okay. Before he murdered your son.
Yeah. He chose the visit that was closest to my birthday, which is a pattern for him because he also killed the other woman the same week as her mom's birthday. I think he just, you know, it's like, this is just a sick, crazy person who hates women. Who knows like what his weird thing is, but he had 4 visits. And on the 4th visit, my son died.
Now, and your son, drowned. Is that correct?
So they ruled it a suffocation. Not every expert agreed on how. They essentially agreed that there was some kind of asphyxiation event, right? Either by drowning or, you know, putting a pillow over someone's head or something like that.
Yeah.
I will never forget the day. It took them 3 months to actually arrest him. They had to wait for the autopsy to come back, which I thought was crazy. I was like, you guys know he took out life insurance. You know that this is a pattern. Why does it take so long? And they were like, well, you know, we just had to make sure that like, you know, he didn't die of natural causes. And I was like, but he didn't die of natural causes. You know that, right? So yeah, I remember the prosecutor or the district attorney sat my dad and I down and told me what happened. And, you know, on one hand, I was relieved because I was like, I'm glad that it's obvious enough that he's just finally going to go to jail. But then on the second hand, you know, it's like imagining having, you know, I feel terrible for my son. And it was the moment where I thought to myself, I wish he had never been born because I hate that he had to go through that. And I mean, it's terrible because it's like, I also feel so thankful to have known him. But on the other hand, I also wish that he hadn't had to do that. Like, I wish he hadn't had to live through that. And I feel terrible that I couldn't be there to stop it from happening. And I mean, it's terrible because it did feel like for the 15 months that he was alive, I felt like I spent the whole time trying to make him, I spent the whole time trying to save him, because I knew, once I knew who his dad was, I was like, this is not going to end well.
Right. Now, when did you learn that he had taken this over $500,000 policy on a 15-month-old? He was probably younger.
So it was a few weeks after he died when the police told me they had confiscated records from his house. And I will tell you, that's another area. There's family court that is like my hot button issue, but the life insurance policies in this country and the life insurance legislation is bananas. You can take out a policy on your neighbor without telling them. There's no way that they can know that you've taken out a policy on them unless they have the policy information. He told them that I was dead, and they never checked. This underwriter just never bothered to check. He didn't have custody of Prince, hadn't spoken to him or seen him in 3 months. And obviously I was alive and well, and it was crazy. He didn't even have to prove that he was the father or he had any contact, none of that. Didn't have any proof. The state of Maryland has since, former Governor Hogan actually passed legislation to make life insurance policies on children to kind of like beefing up the underwriting rules.
Mm-hmm.
The problem is, even if you're living in the state of Maryland, you can go to New Jersey and get out a policy, and you don't actually have to follow the legislation from Maryland. So my hope is that the federal government gets involved, because this is one of those issues where it's like, a lot of people get murdered, and life insurance is the motive.
Wow. Incredibly heartbreaking. Now, of course, we're going through this trial. Mm-hmm. How long does he essentially get?
Oh, so he was convicted of capital murder of the state of Virginia. We took the death penalty off the table because he waived his right to a jury trial. And frankly, I don't know. I have all kinds of feelings about the death penalty, but I definitely feel like it's one of those things where survivors don't realize how much they get if they have that on the table, which is a whole nother issue. But it took 5 years to finally get a conviction. And he wasted probably millions in Virginia taxpayer dollars because they let him have his own private attorneys. He didn't have a dime in his name, but the government gave him the right to have that, which is one of the benefits for capital crimes. And so he had a team of 4 of the best, really good private defenders. And they just kept kicking the can. They were like, oh, we're not ready yet, charging. I think when I looked at the records, it was like, it was millions. And I was like, this is disgusting. It took 5 years. He finally got convicted in 2017, and he is serving life without parole at Red Onion State Prison in Virginia.
Wow. Awesome mom you are, to bring a voice in a fight so that this doesn't happen to another family. I hear your passion. I was doing the research before we spoke, and we were going back and forth on the internet. I did not know the full story when I invited you on the podcast. And once I got into you and your web page and your fight, and listening to all of these on YouTube, your videos and your fight and news stories, I was floored. However, to see the energy that you have, the passion that we make changes, and now it's just phenomenal what you're doing. And I know that your son will always be a living spirit around you, and he's this driving force, so that you can possibly save another child. Truly heartbreaking story, but your fight is so needed. So
Thank you.
Thank you definitely for that. Now, you essentially, and I'm not for sure if you can talk about this, but you essentially sued not the state, but you sued the psychology firm.
Yeah, I can't get into it too much, but essentially, one of the biggest issues in our case, and this is similar to what the current bill that I'm advocating for in the state of Maryland, which is to train custody evaluators. But the custody evaluator actually understood that our case, you know, she got it that he was dangerous. She recommended that he have supervised visitation, and when she testified on the stand, my ex's attorney basically tore her apart and was like, well, you don't have the experience to say that he's dangerous. And so the bill that I'm advocating for, which is Maryland Senate Bill 365, which essentially requires appointed evaluators to have a certain amount of training in child abuse so that they can make those recommendations. But because she could not stand on what she thought because of her background, she recommended that he get psychologically evaluated. And unfortunately, because perhaps she wasn't aware that a psychopath can find anyone to say anything, she let him choose his own evaluator. He chose somebody who was not licensed in the state of Virginia to evaluate adults. And in fact, this person had a school psychology license that actually prohibited her from testing anyone outside of a school setting. And she gave a report that he was only suffering from mild depression. And so part of the reason that I brought the suit was I thought it was really important for people to understand that these people come into court and they say that they are, you know, subject matter experts and, you know, they testify under oath. And it's like, look, if you and I testified to perjure ourselves or what have you, like there are consequences potentially. And I think the thing that's really hard about family court is often these people have immunity.
Right.
Like, judges can make terrible decisions. You know, you could even find out that a judge was corrupt and accepted money, and they have this immunity that prohibits people from suing them personally. And so I really wanted to kind of bring light to the fact that oftentimes these, you know, so-called experts really do have no business coming in and saying that they're experts. And I do think that the judge put a lot of weight on her recommendations. And I think he put a lot of weight on the custody evaluator, you know, essentially recommending a psychiatrist or a psychologist. And so, yeah, I mean, if anyone's listening to this in the state of Maryland, Senate Bill 365, please contact your representatives and support it. Really what we're trying to do with a lot of the legislation is making it mandatory that certain protections exist. So a lot of the family law landscape, it gives judges these sort of loopholes to let them do things that I think are very inappropriate. Like in the state of Maryland, for example, a judge there is a rule, which is basically like a recommendation for judges, that they appoint a custody evaluator who has experience in child abuse. However, if you are a very wealthy pedophile in the state of Maryland, you can hire a private evaluator who has no business making recommendations, and there are judges who will appoint that person to the case. And so you can essentially pay your way out of, you know, any repercussions of abuse.
Yeah, that is so unfortunate and horrible. Mm-hmm. Absolutely horrible. For those that's out there that is building up the courage to leave or have left an abusive situation, can you give them the starting steps? They know that they may have not reported it. They may not have a trail. However, what can they do? They've gotten the courage enough to leave. They know that they're going to have a fight somewhere in the family courts, but they have been dangerous to you, abusive, and you're scared to have your children. Where do they start? How do they build their case to fight for their children?
Oh, that's hard. I mean, so first thing I would say is leverage your community. And this is like even outside of the legal stuff, like this is essentially you're about to go into battle for your life and your child's life. And so, you've got to leverage your community and people help and be there for you. I would say the second thing is find yourself a good therapist. Your attorney is not your therapist. And if you try to use your attorney for a therapist, you're going to end up broke with bad advice. So get a therapist. I highly recommend that, because not doing so after trauma is like not casting a broken leg and then wondering why you can't walk years later, right? So like you have got to fix yourself. And I think a really important part, at least for me, an important part of my journey, and this is why it took me a decade to write this book, because I was like, I need some perspective. I needed to heal myself, and I needed to really think hard and introspectively about why I ended up with this person, the decisions I made, and really like hold myself accountable and find the strength. And I don't think it would have been possible without a therapist. Right. I would say another thing is obviously getting a really good family attorney, and kind of understanding that you have to cope ahead. Like there's going to be moments where you will probably have to turn your child over to somebody who is not safe. And the best thing you can do that you have control over is be that rock for when that kid comes home. Right. Mm-hmm. I also will tell parents oftentimes, like, as much as you hate this person, right? You hate them. Be very careful about what you say about this person in front of that child, because even if this person is dangerous, I think parents sometimes forget when they say something about that other parent, that child is thinking, I have those genes inside of me, right? And it's like you're saying something that is going to potentially harm that child's self-esteem, right? Right. So I think the better thing to do is try your best to make it so that your child has safe access to this parent. Like I am a huge proponent of supervised visitations, because I do think children do have a right to know this person and make their own decisions, right? And right. So you can provide safe access to that parent. And just when that child comes to you and they want to talk to you about what this person is doing, when they see it for themselves, be their rock, right? And affirm their feelings without kind of projecting your own. And get a good attorney. Like, I had a good attorney, right? So I can't even say it's like a good attorney. I just think that oftentimes parents are in this situation and they don't realize that so much of it you really can't control. Like you can control how you show up in court, and trauma responses are very real. And you kind of have to get to the point where you're like, all right, I can only do what I can do. And right. I do have the power to work on myself. I do have the power to create a safe, healthy environment for my child when they're with me. Mm-hmm. Make sure that because look, like 9 times out of 10, like most parents aren't going to kill their kid, right? So like, I don't want parents to think like, oh my gosh, just because this person is abusive or whatever, my kid's going to end up dead. That's not to say that you should rest on your laurels, right? Like go fight and try to, make sure that the access is safe, but also understand that, sometimes the best you can do is to create that healthy environment. And, I think another thing that's really important is to model healthy relationships for your child. So I often tell parents who are in that sort of stuck, like, oh, but I have to stay married to the parent. I'm like, do you, or is it healthier to put up boundaries and be like, I'm not doing this, and find a healthy partner so that your child has that as a model, like, and not just a romantic partner, like healthy friendships, healthy familial relationships and things like that. Right. Are so important. And those are things you can control, right? You can't control the chaos in the family court. Like that's what me and the other advocates are trying to do. We're trying to make it better. We're trying to, make the laws more protective of children. But really just my biggest advice would be focus on that. And one of the reasons I wrote my book, Defying Silence, is really like, I wanted to write the book I needed when I was in it. Gotcha. So I talk a lot about like kind of how I processed it, how I went through it step by step, and also some of the things that, like, some of the landmines I didn't know existed. And so really, if parents are in it, I would read the book, just see that as like, okay, these are things that I should watch out for. And I'm hoping that people will read it and it will affirm their experience. They will, give them some tips on how to survive it. And I'm also hoping that both people who've been there and people who haven't, they'll read the book and realize, oh, this is a call to action. These are some ideas of how I can be the change that I want to see in the world.
Right. Now, can you tell our listeners, of course, your information, all of your contact information is going to be available for them. Can you go ahead and let them know how they can grab this book, Defying Silence?
Yeah. So again, it's Defying Silence, a memoir of a mother's loss and courage in the face of injustice. You can find it on Amazon. You can find it on barnesandnoble.com, walmart.com. Your local indie bookstore can order it as well. You can also go to your local library and ask them for a copy. The audio version is available on Audible and a bunch of other platforms like Spotify. And you can follow me on Facebook at Hera McLeod, follow me on Instagram at Seeking Different, and yeah, check out my website at heramcleod.com.
Awesome. I know that you're also doing speaking events,
Yes.
which is great as well. So I'm glad that you're, keeping your voice out there, informing people, and I love being on the stage and being able to share, my testimony. It actually adds to your life. It gives us joy that
I do speaking engagements about my story, but I also do training for a lot of first responders and court officials, lawyers as well, to talk about trauma response and also talk about the difference between observation and inference. Because I think a lot of the trouble in family court is that people are people and we all are biased, and really helping people understand, like, what is an observation and what is my inference where I'm adding potential bias. Not to say you should ignore your inference, but like you should just understand, what lens you're putting on something and what negative impact that could have on a child's life.
Right. Awesome. Yes, all of the information will be below. I always in my episodes and giving kind of wisdom. This is a little bit different. We want to speak to. Let me bring this back up. Where did I lose it? We want to provide a message out there for women that's in an abusive marriage or relationship. But I want to add to that. I want to also give a message to women that are now leaving their children in the care of individuals that they barely know, like boyfriends. Things are happening out there.
Yeah.
Can you go ahead and give that final message of wisdom to individuals?
I think that we are often raised to believe that everyone is good. And I think it is really scary when something happens to make you realize that that's not true. It certainly was the case for me. And I think that as parents, we should always think about the fact that our children don't have choices. And in America, they do not have basic civil rights because our government expects parents to extend our rights to our children. And so, yeah, I would just tell parents, like, be very careful who you trust around your children and believe them. Like, kids will tell you, and when they report that something has happened, I'm going to need you to believe them.
Yes, we both will need you to believe them. I definitely was one that shared. I didn't keep the silence, and I did share. It wasn't believed. And so I kept more silence on other abuse because it wasn't heard the first time. It is so important that we listen to our children and also listen to their nonverbal responses. Notice when your child is acting funny or standoffish, or don't want to play or be around
them. How to talk about it. Like, from a very early age with my two daughters, I was like, look, we're not going to call it our lady parts. We're not going to call it that. Like, you you name it for what it is, and you tell, you have conversations about consent and what that means. My daughter and I have a podcast called Seeking Different, and we actually have an episode about consent. And we talk about it. I'm like, look, from don't touch my hair to, are you asking me to take my clothes off? Like things that are appropriate. Like, okay, unless you are with a doctor and mommy is present, nobody should be looking underneath your pants, right? Having those conversations and not being afraid to talk to the kids about these topics that are hard. And I think a lot of times people don't give kids credit. Like they are people, and you have to teach these things. And you also have to foster a relationship with your child as an adult so that they feel comfortable and safe telling you things.
Yes, that's very important. Thank you, Hera, for being on the show. Thank you for sharing your voice and your fight. We'll definitely be looking at what you're doing and all of the fight on Congress and everywhere to make changes that we definitely need to keep our kids safe. So thank you so much. You guys have been awesome tuning in.